Between two dumbbells is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical, fitness, or nutritional advice.
Loading to Loading to
You either see value in the information or you don't, and that's cool. You're not going to offend me. I've got pretty thick skin after 54 years in this industry. I come from the message boards. I've pretty much heard it all. Welcome to Between Two Dumbbells. I'm your host, Skip Hill, and I'm here today with Dr. Marv. We're going to get together. We're going to kind of deep dive on some exercises, dip into the mechanics, our opinions. We're going to posit some arguments, get debate going between the two of us. This is going to be one of those situations where I might not have someone to agree with me 100% of the time, right, Dr. Marv?
Correct. And vice versa, which is going to be great.
Absolutely. I think it's better as a listener, as a viewer, and we both agreed on this, that it's not very exciting when everybody on the show pats each other on the back and agrees, man, we're so smart. We know it all. We're super geniuses like Wile E. Coyote, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun. I kind of think that I'm coming at it from this dinosaur background of doing this for so long. I've got 40 years of training course, 20 plus with online prep coaching, that sort of thing. So I've got a lot of ideas. I've got ideas that other people don't agree with. And then I've got ideas and thoughts that make some people go, hadn't thought of it that way. And I think that is why I wanted to do this for so long. But I needed someone with a brain on the other side of the screen. And here's the thing. I want to make sure that when I say that no one thinks you're saying the other guys that you do podcasting with, they're not very smart. That's not the case at all. They don't want to deep dive into these types of things. So I wanted to separate the two and kind of put this information out there for people to ponder and agree or disagree. So Dr. Marv, I need you to let everybody know, what is your background? What brains are you bringing to the project here?
Yeah. Well, don't get your hopes up too much, but I am what I identify as an educated meathead. For the last 17 years, I've done something regards to, I guess we'll call it physical culture. So my undergrads in kinesiology, I worked in an acute physical therapy clinic the entire time, was a trainer for a long time, transitioned to being an online coach. And then a couple of years ago, 6 years ago, decided I didn't want to spot people in my 40s, went back to school and became a performance chiropractor. Why I became a chiropractor is I've had 9 surgeries and I'm beat to shit. And every doc's answer was just quit doing what you're doing and what you love. And when they told me to quit lifting weights and quit playing guitar, I said there has to be a better way, and it set me on this path. And I am somebody who training is my favorite topic of all time, way more so than nutrition, chiropractic, health. Training is my number one topic. So super excited to go over stuff. And I think people need to remember you're allowed to disagree with people and still be friends and still respect each other. So I would say 70% we're going to agree on, 30% will be for fun. And I hate being in an echo chamber. Like even my business partner with my office that I'm an owner at, like he and I don't agree on everything. You never should, in my opinion.
Right.
So I'm really excited for this.
It's cool. We had a lot of parallels. It's just not in the educated, articulate intelligence department. But I think that's going to make a great combination too. Like I said, the experience backed with you being able to explain maybe a lot of the things. I almost said some of the things, but a lot of the things that I haven't been able to kind of expound on because I don't have that background. So it's going to be fun. First thing I want to do is I want to posit this to you, or postulate. We'll see who wants to argue about about the verbiage. I posit that the behind the neck press, and this will make some people cringe, and I like that. I posit that the behind the neck press is not predominantly an anterior delt move, that it is an excellent move and a better movement for the side delts. Now, I'm not asking you agree or disagree right away, but give me your thoughts on that. Do I have anything there?
Yeah. Well, on paper, yes, I completely agree with you. I will have an asterisk that most people have no business doing it. But we know as our pressing gets more vertical, it shifts from front delt to middle delt, especially behind the neck, because now I am not pressing at an angle. I'm pressing almost behind me. And we do know that that puts way more stress on the middle delt or the side delt than the front delt. So I completely agree with you on that, which a lot of people will disagree with. What I will say, though, is most people have no business even attempting that, but we will try to give them things they could do to work on and understand the biomechanics of the movement to maybe one day put a bar behind their back. Of course, how you do it's a big deal, which I will let you explain how you execute it first. But I would agree behind the neck is better middle delt than front delt. And then to throw a wrench in this whole conversation, once we're done, you covering how you do it, I cover the biomechanics and prep work. I'm then going to challenge you and say, is overhead pressing even necessary in bodybuilding after you get to a certain level of development?
Sure. And there may be a takeaway here for me where I think maybe my execution could be a little bit different or tweaked a little bit to be more effective. So very cool. Now I want to touch on this first because I think this is important and it's kind of a get it out of the way. It might be the elephant in the room because typically the argument against this movement, especially recently, is the EMG. And I remembered, I struggle with acronyms sometimes when they're very close to something else. EMG allows, I can remember it now because it's close to AMG. Mercedes AMG, high performance, kind of the M version, a Mercedes M version, if you will. So I'll remember that from now on. But how do we get around the fact that the EMG, or can we not get around the fact that the EMG testing says this is absolutely 100% a front delt? Anybody who argues any different, they're ignorant, even though they've trained for 40 years. They're just not articulate, intelligent, and educated. What do I say to that? You're right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who did his whole PhD on EMG? Dr. Scott Stevenson. Even he will say there are major limitations to EMG studies when they're pad-based because they're simply putting pads on a muscle and measuring the electrical activity. You want to be accurate, you throw a needle in the muscle. Nobody's going to do that. So,
well, never say never. I mean,
correct. Yeah, sure.
I got you.
But a perfect example is on surface EMG studies. Your rotator cuff muscle is actually more active than your pecs on a flat barbell bench press. That doesn't mean your rotator cuff's the primary mover, but it has more electrical activity due to the stabilization standpoint of it. I don't know EMG studies for this movement off the top of my head. Other movements I do, but it is my understanding with people who do the whole EMG route who have confirmed that behind the neck is middle delt more so than a traditional bar in front of you.
Fair enough. So far, so good. I don't feel stupid just yet. So I'm going to go down the path of my execution to, and kind of what I prefer. Number one, you make a good point as far as not a lot of people can do this exercise, especially right out of the gates. I think about guys who are really big, and I'm not really big, so I probably can get away with it, for that being one of the reasons. The other thing I've noticed is if I take a break from the exercise for a few months even, and I come back to it, I got to warm up, even though I don't use it as an opener. A behind the neck press for me is, I don't want to say it's a closer, but it's what I call growth stuff exercise. It's either in the middle of my delt exercises or it's closer to the end. I want to do that movement when I'm pretty warm. And I typically train shoulders after chest because I have a long history of a slightly torn labrum from playing baseball when I was a teenager. I just moved my shoulder just so it could pop. You can't hear it, you can't see it, but if you put your hand on the top of my shoulder and I did it, you'd be like, oh. So that's been something that I had to train around in my early days, and I don't even give much thought to anymore because there are those few exercises I have to stay away from, and I don't gamble. I stay away from them. Behind the neck press isn't an issue for that. I just have to be very careful because it's a range of motion. It's a flexibility issue. Am I going down the road? Okay, that's how I feel about it. So there are a couple things that I do with this movement to make it less of a vulnerability. Number one is I only bring the bar to what would essentially be my nose or eye level behind my head. Okay, you could argue the base of the skull. Okay, that's fine. I like the cues in the front because you can't see the base of your skull from the back. You can feel it if you hit it, I guess, with the bar. Another thing is, and I don't have a preference seated, standing. In fact, I hadn't done seated for a while. And I did it the other day. And I thought, oh, I might be a little bit stronger in this position than the actual standing version. But at the same time, I typically stand. I don't do them typically with a barbell, like a free weight, though I've done it. I've done it with dumbbells just to make it more complicated. But you can bet that the poundage comes down considerably when you have to use all that stabilization, which is good. Don't get me wrong. It's not a bad thing. But when you just want to, I don't know, kind of target the muscle more instead of worry about your stabilizers and breathing's difficult as well. You know, if you're using it at the end of your workout, you're not as fresh. You're breathing a little harder, and stabilization becomes an issue, of course. So bringing the bar down to the eye nose level, that's number one. Warming up real well. And I have a couple things that I do that would be difficult to demonstrate sitting here. One of them is when I come in initially and I start, and we're talking 10-pound plates on the bar, maybe. To start.
Are you using a Smith machine?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm glad you bring that up because it's
vertical or diagonal.
Exactly. That's where I was going.
Okay.
I am forced to use one that is vertical because the two gyms that I train at don't have the angled version. However, and this is another caveat that I think is important, if you have an angled press, I want that angle to go away from me as I lock out. Okay, it's kind of for lack of a better word to explain it or phrase to explain it, it's a backward push, if you will, versus to the front. I think it would make more sense if you're going to push to the front that you're doing that press with the bar in front of you. It's more of a military press than a behind the neck press. So that's the second point. The other thing, third, I'm going to stay with 3 main points because I could go on and on. People know that about me. But that third point is total lockout, almost a hesitation at the lockout. And now this is something that probably not everybody can get away with. The reason that I get away with it and I find it beneficial is because I have shoulders that are about as wide as a Ken doll. In fact, I wonder if my mom named me Ken. I don't know which one came. I don't know if I came. I'm pretty sure the Ken doll came before. I know Barbie did, but maybe Ken didn't come until after 1970. I don't know. But the point is I have incredibly limiting width to my shoulders, which doesn't help with back. It doesn't help with a lot of stuff. Point is on that lockout, I get that contraction at the lockout where, and I think most people would agree on this. I don't think a lot of people would argue that the bottom portion of a shoulder press, there is a lot more involvement for the upper chest, as well. So if I combine those 3 things, only bringing the bar down to that eye nose level, and then of course full lockout, I feel like that is honing in on the side delt even more so than, let's say you have the flexibility and you want to take it deeper and you want to touch your traps. I've been there. When I used to do the movement, when I was a lot smaller, I could get it down to my traps and I never had any pain with it or anything like that. But I can't argue that it was more effective. In fact, I would tend to lean towards the fact that it's more effective not going as deep. So let me hand it over to you after giving you those 3 points and rip me to shreds. Tell me what you agree with, disagree with. Let's go there.
Are you doing any specific warm-up movements before the press, or it's middle of your workout and you're already warm, so you just start light and work your way up?
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons, again, that I don't do that as a opener. So I do have plenty of blood in my side delts at that point. And again, and this is important to note too, is using this movement as a side delt movement, I open my shoulders with side delts. Because I'm narrow, that is the bulk of my focus. So as an example, I may do cable side laterals, both at the same time with the pulley slightly in front of me. That way I get kind of a backward pull, which is another great exercise that we can dig into in another episode. With those angles, because of that being a multi-angle joint, there's a lot of variability there with the angles that you can use for laterals. And then I typically go, and that movement is what I call kind of an opener. So it's far more strict. It's to pump. It's to really work a lot of blood into the muscle. Then I get into a heavier, not sloppy, mind you, I'm a mechanics guy, but a heavier side delt movement that is more dumbbell based. That's what it might be standing, might be lying, facing into a high incline, something along that line. And then move into, once there's a ton of blood in there, then a movement like the behind the neck press. I think what you're asking, though, I was just giving that reference as kind of a visual for what comes before as far as exercises. But as far as any type of warm-ups, I do a couple that you'll probably rip me for. So I'm going to benefit from this.
Yeah.
Make no mistake. But remember, I'm also training side delts after chest. And part of that reason is what I touched on earlier with that torn or slightly torn labrum that's always been there. If I just walk into the gym and I start training shoulders, even warming up really well, it doesn't feel as good. It's going to nag me. It's going to be a little achy. So for
is it
years,
a slap
I trained
tear? Is it a slap tear? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was diagnosed literally because I used to be a catcher. And back then, you'd catch every game. It's not like 2024 ball where you're a utility player, you catch, you play first base, and you play a little bit of outfield, which would have been nice. So there were times where I would catch, 7 games over 3 days and 160 or not 160, maybe 120, 130 games, traveling ball, just like crazy. So anyway, combining that with bodybuilding, it was just a bad idea, but as a teenager,
Yeah.
we all did dumb shit when we were teenagers. So I don't know if it's a slap tear, but I do know, and I can give you like when I move my shoulder like this and I rotate it, there's a point where it kind of rolls over the cartilage. It pops. It doesn't hurt, but it just rolls over enough.
Yeah.
So that's the best diagnosis. I got it. I had a diagnosis at that point, but I can't remember what it was. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. I'm 54. I'm coming up on 55.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know we're getting kind of like more medical, but slap tears are really common with big league pitchers. That's why they're able to externally rotate to throw as much. So if a slap tear could heal over and callus and have a little bit of shifting, not cause pain, they're not a death sentence. I have that on both shoulders. Had one on the left years ago, did this one last year, the year before. It's all blending together, re-aggravated this one. So this one's pissed off. So there's no way in hell I can't even press overhead right now. And there's no way I'm even going to attempt a behind the neck press. But I also have confounding factors. So the mobility demands for a behind the neck press are significantly more than bar and front. We'll start from the shoulders and work our way down. The big thing is you're going to need a lot of external rotation, right? So that's an overhead movement. So for people who don't know, let me try and simplify this quickly as possible. As you're flexing your arm up from your side to about 60 degrees, your shoulder must externally rotate. From 60 to 120, the shoulder must internally rotate. And then as you go higher, it must externally rotate again. So behind the neck press, overhead pressing is largely external rotation driven, while a bench press, a flat chest press, is largely internal rotation driven. So you're asking, folks, if they don't have enough external rotation to put their shoulder in that position, what confounds it is then their upper back or their T-spine cannot extend. So I actually prepped. So this is your spine, everybody. If you cannot extend enough through your upper mid back, you cannot get your shoulders fully retracted, which is requirement for an overhead press. So that's a combination.
Was that a chin? Is that a jawbone?
So it's just the base of your skull. So you're taking the bar to right about there, which is called your occiput. So that's the backside. That's probably about as low as you're taking it. Yeah. You're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah. I didn't know if that was the front or the back. I was very quickly trying to figure that out.
So to fully retract your shoulders, you need to extend your mid back. Most people have a hard time with that based on posture, society, muscle tone, blah, blah, blah. And then one other big thing or two other big things is most people are lacking rotation, especially external or internal, of the shoulder based on, how their rib cage is currently shaped and moving, because your rib cage is very malleable. So a lot of people can't externally rotate merely based on rib cage shape, which is a whole huge topic, but we could kind of just briefly talk on it. But the big thing is lacking external rotation of the shoulder, whether that's rib cage, whether that's a previous injury, muscle tone, tight lats. There's a whole bunch of stuff that go to that. An inability to fully extend your mid-back or your T-spine, rib cage stuff. And then also a lot of people might have pain if they don't have good shoulder blade mechanics of how a shoulder is supposed to move. That could put them in a position where it's now irritating tissues and pinching a rotator cuff muscle, pinching the bicep, which is how a lot of people get hurt lifting weights. So a lot of that is, all those combined to where if you don't have a ton of great mobility, good luck getting in that position. I think you're asking for an injury of actually injuring yourself. But if you can get to behind the neck, that means your mobility is damn good in a variety of ways, right? If you notice, it wasn't just one thing. So you've got mobility and everything moving harmoniously together to get you in that position. Also, like, what is a behind the neck press? It's essentially a back squat position. So especially for bigger dudes or gals or super muscular, like, if we lose this ability, what do they have to do? They have to start putting their arms wider and wider on the bar, which probably not the best for stability. And that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, a lot of stuff go into being able to even execute a behind the neck press, which I don't think most people do. I think that's why it gets poo-pooed on, because a lot of people get hurt because they have no business even attempting to do it.
Brings me to my next question, which I think is a good point too. It's actually two parts to it. Number one, very simple question. Should we all have that mobility? Even with size, should that mobility be there? Because I would argue that it should.
I agree. On paper in a vacuum, it should. Rarely is what I'm seeing in office and online. But if you can get to that, kudos, because the more mobile we are, the better advantageous positions we could get in, the more movements we could do, decrease injury risk. You're able to get in better positions. Yeah, I think. But like for me, I have 2 torn labrums. You have 1. I have all these other issues. I could either really work on behind the neck press and most likely tweak and aggravate something and set myself back, or I could keep doing what I know I can do, modify, don't eliminate. That's my big mantra with people with injuries. And that's kind of who I attract because I'm so damn beat up. I've had to modify a bunch of stuff, but on paper in a vacuum, you probably should be able to, but I don't see it. I think that you're the exception rather than the rule.
Interesting too, because I've had that injury for so long, because that movement does not bother me. Even when I'm tight and I haven't used that movement, obviously I'm more careful and I warm up more, and I may not go as heavy that time. I wait to go heavier after I get more consistent with that movement. Brings me to my second point, which is this. Can it be argued that external rotation and having that external rotation to be able to do that movement, external, just basically, the external rotation back, that ability to not be limited, that range would make for a better front bicep or front double bicep? I mean,
that's where I was going to go next is don't just leave it on the table, because that dramatically changes posing. I completely agree. What do most really, really big guys struggle in? That position. They literally... Their fist is literally like there in relationship, and they're not able to show everything off, especially that peak.
Sure.
So 100%, like people, another perfect example, people poo-poo on face pulls. I'm like, that is a double back bicep for reps and strength and control. You don't think you need to do that? Plus all the good rotator cuff stuff it does. So I completely agree. As guys get bigger, they get more limited with their ability to move. That's why, Andrew Jack does a split at his size. It's like, damn, like he's put in a lot of work to be able to do that. That's incredible. And that's helping his ability to present on stage.
Okay, I'm going to add a third prong. I don't want to go down a different rabbit hole into a different movement, but I do want to bring this up because this just occurred to me as well. Having more external rotation and the ability to get into the position for this press behind neck, would that not be more beneficial too for 2 things, back training and remember, in a front double bicep, even in a lat spread, wouldn't we benefit with that rotation to help open up the back from the front and back, quite frankly, in a front or rear double bi? The reason I say that is because I have a hard time with my right scapula and my right lat wanting to come out as far as my left lat when I don't have or am not using the press behind there. I'm not trying to pave this golden path towards the behind the neck press.
You must behind the neck.
Yes, you have to, and I'm going to fight to the death for this movement. But at the same time, when I'm doing that, and I have that better range of motion for that external rotation, my lat on the right side wants to come out much more evenly than my left. I still have soft tissue work. I do have dry needling and cupping with motion and everything.
Good.
That really helps to keep that. In fact, it brings my left one out farther too, but they're actually quite even. And without that soft tissue work, like say for the last 3 or 4 months, but I'm starting again next week with my buddy who's a DPT, and he's awesome. He'll see him only once a week, and within 3 weeks, it's night and day. Sometimes I have that work done right before I train back as well. But anyway, like I said, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of back, but I guess what I'm trying to say is this movement, I know I'm arguing the behind the neck press, but I want to also make it a point to point out that there are other benefits, other positives to have that external rotation to be able to get into that position. Am I putting up a good fight or no?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And that's going to do things with other muscle tones. So when people can't flare a lat, and whether it's, double back, front relaxed, front lat spread, a lot of it, that same side muscle, your rotator cuff called your subscap's bound up along with your lat. So if I externally rotate more, that's going to put more length into that muscle because that muscle's main job is to internally rotate. So by definition, if I'm externally rotating it, I'm lengthening it. So that'll help. So that's probably why you see that as you're maintaining more range of motion, like naturally without outside intervention of manual therapy or specific exercises. But you absolutely could do a couple breathing exercises or self-tissue release, or even do your double back, do a couple sets of face pulls, do your double back again. You'll notice a difference.
Sure.
Like, there's a lot that goes into all this, and you could improve other areas. I would just be very cautious of if you're nowhere near, if you're like your hand's here with a bar, which is like barely past my nose, I wouldn't all of a sudden force it to go way the hell back there without a lot of stuff. I've literally had strongmen coming back from major shoulder issues. They're using just a PVC pipe in the office.
Right.
And we're just trying, can we get it even to now go past the crest of your skull, let alone there, but just can I even get it behind me?
But how long is it taking
exercise
to increase the range of motion, even for those guys who are tight? Because I would argue that it's probably not a lengthy, we're not talking months upon months, right? I'd say it can be different
rare.
for everybody.
Yeah. Usually it's several weeks, and there's a lot of manual therapy, dry needling's massive, breathing drills. I'll show one specifically for external rotation, which will help with posing as well. Soft tissue work, being in the gym, working on it. Yeah.
Okay, well, and this is a good segue here too. So I'd ask you this. I kind of want to go down the rabbit hole of the rotator cuff muscles. And the reason being, when we're talking about this external rotation, or say the lack of the ability to get into a position that you would need to get into for a behind the neck press, the limiting factor is the rotator cuff muscles, right?
I would argue rib cage is more so for this particular motion, but they are involved, and they will for sure make this a more pain-free movement, for lack of a better word. Like, it'll be more fluid. Yep. And I don't think bodybuilders give enough credit. Like, I'm sorry, you grabbing a 5-pound weight and doing this when gravity's pulling down, it ain't doing squat to really warm you up. And this is like, even with a TheraBand or a cable, which is biomechanically correct, that's like initial stages of you just tore your shoulder, like you just had surgery. That is insulting to what you're asking it to do the second you put even a 25-pound plate on each side of the barbell and even do a military press. Like, this ain't doing a heck of a lot. It is lubricating the joint, maybe getting a little bit of blood in there. If you start working on the rotator cuff, watch how much better all your lifts go. Watch how much more fluid your posing is. That's the big thing that a lot of people don't work on, and they just do this. There's a hell of a lot that we could do for each muscle, and which motion we're doing dictates which one is the primary stabilizer. So, like we were talking off air, somebody has pain when they're working out. I'm like, well, is it pain with pressing or pain with pulling? Because those are immediately go to two different areas based on what they're having pain with.
Okay, so the reason I bring up again, multiple reasons, but I would say my best guess is that the average trainer doesn't even know the rotator cuff muscles, number one, okay? They could probably name 2, maybe 3. From there, if you can't name them all, you're not going to be able to know what the function or what the primary function each rotator cuff muscle is. So probably be a good idea. Can we touch on maybe even in, if there is a level of significance or a level of priority, like as an example, what would be the most, or what is typically the rotator cuff muscle that is the most times the issue, I guess.
So if you didn't know, we have 4 rotator cuff muscles. This is the top one. It's called your supraspinatus. Fun fact, it is the most commonly torn rotator cuff, and the average person who tears this the most is elderly females. The reason for that is if we don't have good shoulder blade control, what I think should be a design recall on the human body are these hooks of the shoulder blade. They're pinching and rubbing and wearing down. So right where that goes under there, that's why that's most commonly torn from wear and tear. That's main job is the first 15 degrees of something called abduction, i.e. the beginning of a lateral raise of raising your arm out to the side. Now, when we're pressing infraspinatus, this is a big one. This is the most active rotator cuff as your primary stabilizer and all pressing. So when I said people have pain with pressing, usually it's a combination of bicep in the front and or infraspinatus in the back. This is an external rotator, and it actually has the ability to externally rotate your arm when your upper arm is out in space, not tucked by your side. Its little helper is this guy called your teres minor. It has the mechanical advantage of externally rotating out when your elbow's by your side. And then this guy here, this is big for posing, called your subscap. That is the most active stabilizer on all pulling motions. And that internally rotates. And when people get bound up here, they cannot flare their lat nearly as much. They are going to have limited overhead range of motion, which is why I actually would recant my previous statement and say, yeah, I think subscap would be a really big one to get mobilized before we go behind the neck. Yes, I talked about how it rotates, but your rotator cuff's main job is to take your upper arm bone and hold it in the socket while your bigger muscles flex and extend it, right? Because otherwise your lat is attached below your rotator cuff. When your lat would fire, it would literally pull it out of the socket. So its job is to pull it inward. That way the other muscles can move it that way. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I may have just learned something that I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to be transparent, and someone's going to go, oh my gosh, he didn't know that. Am I to understand, like right now, this is the realization, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I see. All of those rotator cuff muscles are originating from the scapula itself, essentially making the scapula and basically the scapula the foundation or the basis of the movement, with primarily the movement of the arm when it comes to the rotator cuff.
And it's not a real joint, but it acts like one. So it's by far the most complicated. You combine that with our shoulder being the biggest range of motion, it's a golf ball sitting on a tee. That's why you have from great power comes great responsibility, great risk, great reward. Yes, my shoulder's damn mobile, but because of that, it's less stable. It's the most unstable joint in your body because of the big range of motion. So it's a golf ball sitting on a tee versus your hip socket. I mean, you want to look up something alarming, look up how they replace hips. Surgeons are literally taking sledgehammers and smacking it, trying to break the seal. They don't have to do that with shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah, it would, it seems on the surface that the shoulder joint would be far more vulnerable. In fact, I'm almost surprised that there aren't more shoulder issues than there are hip issues. But I guess with the movement as we age, the constant repetition from years of walking and everything else, I guess that would kind of make sense. But the shoulder to me seems to be a far more vulnerable multi-angle joint than the hip. The hip is surrounded 100%. By incredibly strong muscles, where arguably the muscles surrounding the shoulder are nowhere near as strong. And for reasons that in everyday life, if you're relatively sedentary, I guess they don't need to be. I want to come back real quick and touch on when you were talking about the one or the specific rotator cuff muscle that is involved in the first 15 degrees of angle with the side lateral. And I think this is important because I picked this up from a training partner of mine, a great guy, in Colorado that I was training with for about the last year before I moved to Florida. And when he told me that, I argued with him because I thought, no, that would make partial side laterals silly and overused, but they are not overused, but silly and nowhere near as effective as the bodybuilding industry wants to give them credit for or thinks that they are. But then I thought about it more, and then I thought, no, it doesn't necessarily make that movement ineffective. What it means is you have to get out of, you can't just do partials in the bottom 15% of it. Those partials have to be a bigger partial than just a small partial for them to be very effective. So do you have any type of recommendation? I'm kind of putting you on the spot with this one, but do you have any type of recommendation for a range of motion or a partial side lateral? Or do you think, yeah, that's not a great movement because you're overloading it in that bottom position?
I've never prescribed it yet. People who we both know who are way bigger than us and better than we'll ever be swear by them. And that's one of the things of different strokes, different folks. Try it and see if it works for you. There is going to be a rehab component of it, of strengthening that muscle, because that gets neglected. If what you could do, you could also reverse engineer it and say every time you're doing a lateral, make sure you're stopping before you get to the bottom, so there's still tension. The delt's the primary mover, because otherwise your supraspinatus is going to initiate that motion. So you could also limit how far you come down to make your deltoid work harder. But the partials, to be honest, I've never even tried them. I've prescribed them in early stage rehab, but then we went to much more, typically when it's a rehab standpoint, you isolate and then you integrate is the way you want to do it to strengthen everything and then get everything to work together. But some people who we know, like Dusty, swears by them. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's way better than we'll ever be.
I'm not gonna argue his bent rows. I'm not gonna argue much of anything.
Exactly.
The guy does,
so
right?
so that's so here's this mini rant is, and I think one of the reasons when we started this is people forget what evidence-based is, and it's really frustrating right now because we're in the golden age of research and evidence, and it has to be evidence-based. Well, for starters, do you even fucking know how to read research? Because I highly doubt it.
Right.
I've taken multiple undergraduate, graduate level courses of how to read research. I still do not consider myself an expert. Like, there's a lot that goes into that. 2, evidence-based is 3-pronged, and they should be 3 equal chairs. What does the research say? What is your personal experience, anecdotal experience, whether you're a clinician, a coach, a doctor, a teacher, right? And then patient or client preference. It should be 3-pronged. Right now, PubMed warriors are winning everything to where if you don't have a study, they don't want to entertain it.
Right.
And it's supposed to be 3 equal parts to a stool. And people forget about that. And so, again, while I will not really prescribe it for a bodybuilding standpoint, maybe I should be. I could be wrong. I'm not saying I'm right. Like, I'm never going to be 100% right. From a rehab standpoint, it makes sense. But because of what I know about the muscle, I've never done them from a bodybuilding. But again, some people who are better than us swear by them. So cool, like to each their own.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough. I do want to come back to the side lateral just real quick and ask you then, could it be argued that leaving the bottom position out of the side lateral could make it more effective for a couple reasons? Number one, I think we can both agree that more muscle fibers fire from the stretch position. So if you're not going all the way down, especially someone with narrow shoulders, because my rib cage almost works as kind of I need to be able to explain this the best way I can for people who don't have narrow shoulders. My shoulders are so narrow that when they're pumped, I can't just stand in the gym with my arms hanging down to the side because they don't hang straight down because I'm so narrow. So I actually need to rest my elbows on something so that primarily my side delts aren't contracted so more blood can get in there. Now that's going to sound silly to someone who doesn't have narrow shoulders, but that's the reality of it. So I would wonder for someone like myself, and I don't know that it really matters whether it's narrow or not. It could be more beneficial to someone with narrow shoulders that we stay out of that bottom position so that there's not a rest position. The muscle can't basically relax even for that half a second. So there's constant tension, but it's also staying in more of a stretch position. I think that's how my brain is processing it. It would increase intensity, but it would obviously lower the amount of weight that you can use based especially on momentum, because there's a little bit of momentum. Even if you're not going to bend over and swing, that little bit of break and that added extra gives you momentum coming back up for a side lateral. So it would minimize the weight. However, the world we live in right now, or for primarily the last few years, is relying on these studies to where we're being told that doing these, to me, I call a spade, and I don't mean any disrespect, but I'm just giving my opinion. But to do a side lateral, say that side lateral leaning into a 45-degree bench, which is putting that side delt in the stretch position to do a side lateral is the most effective way to do a side lateral is bothersome to me. That's why one of the things that I want to do with this show with you and I is not speaking in absolutes, which I don't like to speak in absolutes anyway. My kids will tell you that. Never, ever, and they'll say, I try not to do that because nothing is ever absolute. But to just, I guess, not necessarily go against the grain, but to put other ideas, get outside of the box, I guess. So I'm not against the thinking. I'm not against the EMG saying, hey, this is what says that this muscle fires more in this particular range, this angle. And I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is the takeaway for a lot of people is that's an absolute. And that bothers me because that's not nothing is an absolute. What we are saying is not an absolute either, in fairness. So bringing it back around to that side lateral, I'm just asking as far as an opinion, would you agree that leaving that bottom portion out could be an intensity technique that would be incredibly beneficial for side delt growth, especially if you're someone like myself who the more side delt or delt growth that I can get, the wider I'm going to look because I don't know if I'm ever going to look all that wide.
Yeah. When did we have to only do one exercise per body part?
Right.
So like you could rotate through.
Mm-hmm.
You could use rep tempo, the same range of motion with the lateral, and rep tempo changes the total movement. So next time you're at the gym, everybody could experiment, do a dumbbell lateral raise, and you could stop short at 15 degrees or go all the way down. The first set, you're going to pause in that bottom position for 2 seconds and then initiate it. It's going to be harder at the bottom because there's no momentum and easier at the top, right? The second set, you're going to no pause at the bottom, really momentum, and then pause it at the top. Now that's challenging the short position. So you could rep tempo is another way to change it up with the same range of motion. So I would say rotate through all of them. I guarantee you won't be able to do as much weight or as many reps if you're not coming all the way down to the bottom and gathering and then initiating with the supraspinatus and getting momentum. So it could be another variation because you should be, in my opinion, we should be varying up our exercises over the course of a year. We're not doing P90X muscle confusion, changing it every week.
I do like
but
that.
I am a big believer. I think Dante had it right of 2 or 3 rotations of workouts, especially in the progressive overload. So it's not hammering the same damn movement pattern, both joint friction wise, mobility wise, neurologically, muscle stimulation wise, but kind of having, at least 2 different weeks of rotational of exercises and riding that out for longer blocks. So not a 6-week program, but bare minimum 12. I'd prefer up to 16 in a block, then change the stimulus. Yeah, you have a lot of options to rotate, but I guarantee you will be humbled. And then you add your inclined bench facing in to where now you can't use body swing. If you're used to grabbing the 45s, I guarantee you're going to struggle, maybe even with the 30s, because now you don't realize how much body English you're using. And then you also not come all the way down. Like, you're going to get humbled, but I guarantee your delts will be smoked.
Yeah, good point. So let me wrap it up and let me ask you this. Is this the 70-30? Do you agree with, bringing it back to around to my initial thought about the behind the neck press, and you just threw out the 70-30 as an arbitrary number. That sometimes 70% of the time we may agree, 30 we don't. But it sounds like we're on the same page. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, that the movement should not be necessarily shelved. The reason that I even wanted to touch on this is not only do I feel like it's misunderstood, but it's seen, the press behind the neck is seen as an antiquated, old school movement that kind of, we threw that out years ago. Mm-hmm. And I did. I got rid of it for quite a few years, and I only probably came back to it 6-7 years ago and found it to be very effective for, my training, for my shoulders, because I fight for every ounce of shoulder, muscle mass that I can get. I fight for everything pretty much other than arms and calves. But anyway, and most do. I think most of the listeners are kind of in the same boat. If you're growing like crazy, you're probably not going to be running down every podcast that you can get to try to figure out how to train more efficiently. That's just how it goes. Sometimes it'd be nice to just be gifted and be able to train
so
correctly.
I'm the opposite. Shoulders are my God's gift. I look at a weight and my shoulders grow. but my chest sucked. Your most dominant body part's almost always next to your lagging body part, right? Because that's neurologically what your body learned to do at a young age, and that kicks on. So 100%, yeah, I do agree. Behind the neck's more medial delt than a traditional press. I just think most people do not have the mobility requirements to get in that position, and therefore it's something they could work on. Again, with me, with my injury history, I'm not even going to attempt, but to others they can. And just because you have an injury history doesn't mean it's a death sentence. You can still work your way through it.
Good deal. Well, and in wrapping it up, I want to point out to the viewers, to the listeners, that this is what I want to do. I want to bring an idea out that especially one that I've had for a long time, and then have someone with a brain and an education and the ability to articulate why I'm right or why I'm wrong. And I think that's why. And you know what? There are going to be times where I'm wrong, and that's fine. I'm putting myself out there for that. But I feel like as a listener, as a viewer, that the information we're trying to provide will be beneficial because it's coming from not necessarily two completely different angles, but I'm bringing this, ridiculous amount of, when I started, weights were made of stone. Okay. Bars were made of wood.
Yeah.
That
Brontosaurus was your protein shake.
Yeah, it was kind of a Flintstones type of thing, right? My wife wore the pearl necklace. There's a joke there, but I'll leave it alone. And you're bringing the ability to articulate and to explain from an educated background. And I think if I were out there as a listener and a viewer, that's what I would want. I wouldn't want just one or the other. And that's something that I have, been told for a long time when people want to argue the experience end of things. Well, just because you've been doing it for 40 years doesn't mean you're right. And I start to go, that's a good argument. Because there are a lot of people who've done things for a long time who aren't right, or they're not very bright. They don't know what they're talking about. The years don't automatically give you credibility. And I get that. That's why you're here. You got to help me out.
Yeah. And on the flip side, education doesn't necessarily automatically mean that either.
Sure. Agreed.
That's why it's supposed to be 3, right? Experience, evidence, and then whoever you're working with, or if it's yourself, your personal preferences.
On that note, let me take us out of our maiden voyage, if you will, for Between Two Dumbbells. And I do want to point out to anybody who is still listening, we're not the dumbbells. Okay. It's a plan. And I know people are going to have fun, especially people who disagree. Well, this is how apropos that you named it this, because you two are a couple of dumbbells. The trite response, I'm waiting. YouTube never disappoints, right? Yeah. But now, the list goes on and on. So it will be fun. It will be entertaining. But at its core, really, all we want to do is put out this information, put out our opinions, put out information, back it up. And it's kind of a take it or leave it type of thing. If you want to argue it, that's fine. But I don't know that I have the time nor the desire, inclination, to spend my time in the YouTube comments arguing with people. You either see value in the information or you don't. And that's cool. You're not going to offend me. I've got pretty thick skin after 54 years in this industry. I come from the message boards. I've pretty much heard it all. So, if you go down that rabbit hole of just telling me how old I am or stuff, or you're trying to take personal shots, that's okay, but it's not going to get to me. Either appreciate the information for what it is, and then if you don't, that's fine too. So I want to move into some, personal stuff. We'll mess around with these shows. We'll build into them, obviously. But I'm going to take us out on this note, and I want to thank, especially being the first show, thank anybody who's listening. I also want to add that if there are any sponsors out there who want to pay us a lot of money, because we have this huge pull after the first show, you can reach me at teamskip.com. And, you can send me an email to teamskip1@gmail.com. But again, I do want to say, Dr. Marv, I appreciate that you're willing to put in the time, because this is obviously a huge investment in time and effort, and it's not just about the show, it's everything you prepare for the show. So I appreciate you and the ability to counter me, tell me when I'm right, tell me when I'm wrong, tell me if you agree, disagree. that sort of thing. So I'm excited about the show. We want to try to get a show out once a week. And I want to focus on typically the training and the things that you said in the opening when you said, what you enjoyed. We have those parallels. So we're on the same page. Training, to me, I would rather talk about 3 components: the training, nutrition, or even gear. I'd much rather talk about the training, even though I'm known for the nutrition and the conditioning. So on that note, I'm going to say, for those who don't know, I have been an online prep coach for over 20 years. Born and bred on the message boards. So if anybody is looking to work with me, you can reach out to me at teamskip.com. You can find me on Instagram at Intense Muscle or on Facebook, Skip Hill. Marv, where can people reach out if they want to get a hold of you?
Easiest is Instagram at dr.marvin.saysdc. My website's theeducatedmeathead.com. That is a work in progress. My office is in Houston, Bay Area of Texas. If you want to come into the office for actual assessments, I do telemedicine in Texas. I do consults all over. I just can't medically diagnose you if you don't live in Texas and all that good stuff. And putting up my first meathead biomechanics, bodybuilding anatomy course as soon as we hop off this call. So that's going to be a big endeavor that I'm almost done with. So that'll be available of like deep dives of every muscle, how it works, top training tips. Essentially what this is kind of covering, one movement at a time.
Very cool. And I don't want to forget this point before I close, and that is, if you need the Team Skip Blend protein, the best protein on the planet, and not because I say so, but because other top prep guys have their clients using.
I personally have used Team Skip for probably 7 years now.
Nice. And I've been, I formulated that product back in 2004. It has been 20 years that I have been involved with True Nutrition, back to the point where it was actually called True Protein, prior to True Nutrition. So I have my name on it. That's not why I recommend it. I actually recommend it because I put that formula together years ago, because when I was in competition mode, which I'm back in competition mode, but there was a time for about the last 10 years where I wasn't. I needed something that a quality protein that I could count on and that I could rely on. And once I started using it, then my clients wanted to use it, and then people were reaching out, and it kind of grew from there. So truenutrition.com, you can always use code SKIP, save a few bucks. It's not going to cut the price in half, but it will save you a few bucks. In this day and age, look, it's more money to spend on eggs, right? Because eggs are getting out of control. On that note, I want to thank everybody for listening to the first Between Two Dumbbells episode. That's Linus back there talking, telling me I need to feed him. On that note, thanks, Dr. Marv, and we'll get out of here.
See ya.
Loading team skip. Loading team skip.